Today, we'll continue with the fifth episode on electronic warfare. In the first 5 episodes, we've basically covered the history of our electronic information warfare. Although it was somewhat rough, if you listen carefully, you should have understood why our current electronic and information warfare ranks among the top in the world. This is important because if you don't clarify the history, what we did at each historical stage and how we developed, people might not believe you when you directly give them the answer. For instance, I once had a program introducing weapons, particularly China's equipment, where I mentioned that China's radar is the strongest in the world. As a result, many people didn't believe me, and some even criticized me. But I don't get upset by such criticism. Why? Because for someone to believe in something, they must have a cognition of it. What do we mean by cognition? It means having knowledge in a certain field. You need to be familiar with and have sufficient knowledge in a particular area before you can agree with conclusions drawn in that field without being surprised. That's why our program focuses on popularizing knowledge. Military enthusiasts come in many levels. The third-tier enthusiasts just enjoy the excitement. Oh, this plane, tank, or cannon is so powerful. They focus on the thrill. Typically, this kind of enthusiast likes light weapons because they're simple. Things like machine guns, rocket launchers, and tanks usually attract them. We mean no disrespect. Even third-tier enthusiasts are commendable, true men. A bit more advanced are the second-tier enthusiasts who start researching high-tech weapons like satellites, planes, laser-guided bombs, and various types of missiles. They memorize the specifications, and when they reach this level, they can brag in any setting and leave others impressed. But top-tier enthusiasts not only know the models and performance of missiles and planes, but they also understand engine parameters, the technical origins of these missiles, and can compare these planes and ships globally to determine their rank in the world. They can assess how much better or worse they are compared to China's equipment, pinpointing strengths and weaknesses. There's a significant gap between second-tier and top-tier enthusiasts. To become a top-tier enthusiast, you need to study real-world politics, international situations, and even modern international history. Some might not understand how a military enthusiast could study so much. Let me give you an example. In November and December of 2023, the Houthi forces in the Red Sea used anti-ship missiles to attack U.S. destroyers. As a top-tier enthusiast, upon hearing this news, you'd instantly know without even looking that the Houthi forces fired the Jadar anti-ship missile. You can check the so-called military bloggers who mistakenly said it was the Noor anti-ship missile. They didn't even understand the difference between Noor and Jadar. The Jadar anti-ship missile is a copy of China's C-802, while the Noor anti-ship missile is modeled after China's C-801. One has a range of over 200 kilometers, and the other has a range of about 40 to 50 kilometers, a difference in magnitude. I won't even mention the differences in guidance systems, which are definitely not the same. The Jadar can maneuver during its terminal phase, but the Noor cannot. As a top-tier enthusiast, you'd also know that the Jadar missile was sold to them by Iran, and the technology originated from China. Another example, when the Houthi forces launched a ballistic anti-ship missile at an Israeli merchant ship, some bloggers began to speculate could it be the DF-21, a Chinese missile. They made self-indulgent content from this. But this is because their knowledge and understanding are limited, so their conclusions are only entertaining to the general public. When you encounter real experts, they'll see through it immediately.
The so-called ballistic anti-ship missile launched by the Houthi forces is just a regular ballistic missile with an improved guidance system, and it operates within the atmosphere. My guess is it's Iran's Persian Gulf series ballistic anti-ship missile, most likely the Persian Gulf II.
The predecessor of the Persian Gulf II is the Iranian Fateh 110 series ground-launched ballistic missile. And if you trace it back further, you'll find it's based on the B-610 ground-launched ballistic missile that China exported to Iran in the 1990s. So you see, it all comes back to us. So, how does this missile perform? The B-610 ground-launched ballistic missile is actually a modification of our Honky surface-to-air missile, with a range of 50 to 150 kilometers. It's dirt cheap, and look at that, 30 years later, it ended up in the hands of the Houthi forces, who started using it to attack the U.S. Why do I say that the missile the Houthi forces launched definitely wasn't our DF-21 anti-ship ballistic missile? It's because the DF-21 ballistic missile requires our special satellite and must work with blackout guidance. This is our core technology, and we're the only country in the world that can do this. There's no way we'd sell both the ballistic missile and the satellite to them, nor would we let them use our satellite. Besides, if the Houthi forces had indeed launched a DF-21 to hit the US destroyer, that destroyer would have already sunk. It simply couldn't have survived, because our anti-ship ballistic missile is unbeatable. Even aliens couldn't escape it. Its terminal maneuvering speed exceeds Mach 11, and nothing can intercept it. Even the USS much-hyped Standard Missile 3, which they claim has a 50% interception success rate, well, that 50% is just what's written in the manual. In reality, there's no way it could intercept our missile. Alright, let's not get sidetracked. We're still here to talk about electronic warfare. Why did I digress earlier? I just wanted to emphasize that this episode of our electronic warfare series is going into deep waters. Why deep waters? Because we're going to discuss events that have happened within the last decade. To be honest, this topic is somewhat sensitive, so I can't go into too much detail. Moreover, I don't have all the specifics. On the other hand, the conclusions that can be drawn from this are hard for some people to accept. Why? Because their understanding isn't up to par. So, we need to talk about understanding first. Only when you grasp the basic knowledge in this area will you be able to accept the final conclusion. Otherwise, if I directly say that the US no longer has an advantage over China in electronic information warfare not only now, but also in the foreseeable future, and that the US is practically out of the race, many people will start criticizing me. They'll say, that's impossible, you're bragging to the skies. If the US is so weak, then why hasn't China already unified the world? You can't even take back Taiwan, so stop bragging. Take Taiwan back first before you talk. I already know how they'll criticize me, but the fact is, taking back Taiwan has nothing to do with our electronic warfare technology. As for the Taiwan issue, we can discuss it separately after I finish this series. I've noticed that some critics use the Taiwan issue as a universal argument. For instance, when Huawei phones were selling well recently, and people said we were far ahead in technology, critics immediately responded with, take back Taiwan first before bragging. Similarly, when our domestic cars, especially new energy vehicles, recently overtook Japan to become the world's largest car exporter, critics again said, stop bragging, you haven't even taken back Taiwan yet. It seems that the Taiwan issue has become a universal tool for critics. But critics always think they're right. Alright, back on topic. Let's continue discussing the basic principles of electronic warfare. In the previous episodes, I already mentioned that in the 1990s, academician Wang Xiaomeng made a brilliant decision. During the 1990s, when we were co-developing and manufacturing the Falcon early warning aircraft with Israel, we took the opportunity to undertake the task of independently manufacturing the TR transmission or reception modules. Since then, we have made unstoppable progress in TR module development. What is a TR module? You need to understand this basic knowledge. Otherwise, you won't understand what we're talking about next. This knowledge involves the basic principles of phased array radar. If I only talk about the technology, some people will surely fall asleep. So, I'll explain the dry, technical terms in plain language. Don't say I'm unprofessional, I'm doing it on purpose. What's the difference between phased array radar and conventional mechanically scanned radar? Here, by mechanically scanned radar, I mean all radars that are not phased array radars, including synthetic aperture radar, inverse synthetic aperture radar, and Doppler radar, which I won't discuss today. Today, we'll only talk about active phased array radar, the most advanced radar system in the world. Active phased array radar doesn't work like mechanically scanned radar, where you see a dish rotating, sending out radar signals in all directions and then receiving the reflected signals. Instead, active phased array radar consists of a radar emission panel made up of numerous emission modules. Imagine it as a tiled floor, if you will. Maybe floor tiles are too big, think of them as small ceramic tiles or even mosaics. Each tile is an individual emission module, called a TR module. Each module can independently emit radar waves and also independently receive radar waves. So, what's the advantage? When an active phased array radar has a surface covered with these small tiles, the radar waves it emits are extremely dense and can form a powerful radar wave stream in one direction. Because it doesn't need to rotate, It can lock onto a target and stay locked on, continuously monitoring it. The returning signals are also three-dimensional. You get a clear picture of what the target looks like, how high it's flying, and how fast it's moving, almost like real-time monitoring. Additionally, since these modules can emit radar waves, and radar waves are electromagnetic signals, they can also carry out electronic interference. If the power is strong enough, a directed electronic stream can be sent towards the enemy. If the enemy's protection is weak, it can fry their electronic equipment in an instant. And it just so happens that these TR modules are designed for high power output, so burning out the enemy's radar or electronic equipment is indeed one of the basic skills of active phased array radar. Because our country started manufacturing TR modules very early and at a very high starting point, we've remained at the top in the world in this field. I mentioned this in earlier episodes. Some people might say, that's not right. The concept of phased array radar was first proposed by the Americans. How did we surpass them? Well, the last century was indeed America's time. But this wasn't because Americans were particularly smart, nor because America had some magical land. It was due to the two world wars in the last century, which led to a massive influx of top talent to the US, propelling their technology and culture to lead humanity for decades. Take Einstein, for example. He was originally in Europe, but moved to the US because of World War II. There were many others like him: Werner von Braun, Werner Heisenberg, Enrico Fermi, the one who proposed the Fermi paradox, Otto Hahn, Lisa Meitner, Hans Bethe, and more thousands of top talents. So, it's no surprise that the US was the first to propose the concept of active phased array radar. Oh, speaking of this, allow me to go off topic for a moment. You see, the global superpowers didn't emerge from battles, they rose by seizing opportunities. Take World War I and World War II as examples. Did any of the countries that fought end up in a good position? None of them. The United States, which joined the wars last, ended up becoming a global superpower. So, to those who are clear-headed, think about it. Why rush to fight over Taiwan now? Just wait, crouch down and bide your time. When your opponent makes a huge mistake, you can seize the opportunity. Isn't that better? The most patient hunter is the best hunter. Let's get back to talking about electronic warfare. The US was actually the first country in the world to use phased array radar technology. But, how should I put it? The US as a nation, they first applied this phased array radar technology to land-based radar, and then that was it. You might wonder why they didn't continue to develop such a great technology. I think this reflects a systemic issue in the US. Once they achieve something world-beating, they become content. They aren't like us, with our state-owned enterprises, where everything is planned in 5-year cycles. You earn your salary, so you have to keep working. That's why our research is ongoing and never-ending, unlike in the US. In the US, weapon developers and defense contractors, like the military-industrial complex, their primary goal is to make money. So, without orders, they have no desire to spend huge amounts on research. When a technology works, and when it makes them the best in the world, that's good enough. The military stops buying more. Without orders from the military, private weapons developers like Raytheon won't voluntarily spend big money developing something they might not even be able to sell. If they don't need to research something, they might even consider the high salaries of their researchers a burden and start laying them off. Take the F-22, for example. They've even dismantled the production line for it now. In China, we can't even understand that. How is that possible? But in the US, no orders mean they lay off workers and dismantle the production line. Later on, they couldn't even find the blueprints. But for weapons manufacturers, that's perfectly normal. Why spend big money maintaining a production line that doesn't generate profit? This is the difference between capitalism and socialism. Capitalism is all about profit, while socialism works according to a plan. So, which system is superior? Think about it. The US did indeed invent phased array radar technology, but they stopped at land-based systems. Meanwhile, in the 1990s, Israel was the first to propose putting this technology on an aircraft, the Falcon we talked about earlier. That was the first airborne early warning system equipped with active phased array radar. Thankfully, academician Wang Xiaomo seized the opportunity, and we collaborated with Israel on this project. Our role was to work on the TR modules, which is why China became the first major manufacturer of TR components. Our starting point was very high. We began with airborne active phased array radar. 30 years later, not only has our airborne radar technology continued to develop steadily, but we've also extended this radar technology to sea-based and land-based platforms. You see, we started with the highest-end technology and gradually disseminated it downwards. In contrast, the US did invent active phased array radar, but they stopped at land-based systems. Decades have passed, and now they see that all Chinese warships are equipped with active phased array radars. Even our export-grade fighter jets, like the JF-17 Thunderjets we don't even use ourselves, come with active phased array radars. What's more aggravating for them is that even our crop-dusting drones are equipped with phased array radars. Do you think they're panicking? Now they're panicking, but even if they take off their shoes and run, they won't catch up with us. And why do I say they'll never catch up? 30 years ago, when we had just started opening up to the world. What does reform and opening up mean? It means participating in global trade, doing business, and earning foreign exchange. But there's an economic principle to understand. Back then, who dictated the global division of labor? Global capital did. And where was the global capital? In the US. To put it simply, the US decided what you could do and what you couldn't. If the US didn't let you do something, you couldn't do anything at all. So at that time, the US positioned China in low and light industry manufacturing underwear, socks, plush toys, Christmas trees, jeans, that kind of stuff. These industries were leftovers from Japan and South Korea. We were just eating the scraps they left behind. That was the initial stage of our reform and opening up. Back then, even if a business owner wasn't highly educated, they could still make money. As long as they were willing to work hard, money was easy to earn. Nowadays, it's different. No matter how hard you work, without education or knowledge, you can't play in the high-end manufacturing game. Can you work hard and create artificial intelligence or develop an app? No. So, money isn't getting harder to earn. It's that your education, knowledge, and understanding are increasingly out of sync with China's role in the global division of labor. This is why many business owners are now moving their factories to Vietnam or Malaysia, because their level of education and knowledge only allows them to participate in low-end manufacturing. But they personally feel like it's just that it's becoming harder to make money in China, and that China isn't doing well. Okay, let's get back on track. So, in the early 1990s, people started going to the South to work in the textile and toy industries. I remember there was even a TV show called Working Girl that was pretty popular at the time. As we did well in these industries, Japan and South Korea began passing on their high energy consuming, high pollution, and labor-intensive industries to us. This included areas like liquid crystal and mining, especially ore processing and smelting. For example, we quickly became the world's largest producer of crude steel, but it wasn't very profitable, just hard-earned money. But our country is the kind that, as long as there's food on the table, will keep working. The population is too large, so there was a specific type of smelting that we took on, aluminum smelting, also known as electrolytic aluminum. Smelting aluminum ore doesn't make much money, it's extremely energy intensive, and it caused a lot of pollution at the time. We were basically earning a pittance. However, as fate would have it, the aluminum smelting industry produces a byproduct called gallium. The character for Ga is a combination of a metal radical and the character for home. Gallium is a rare metal, and while it's rare, there wasn't much demand for it back then, so it didn't make much money. We sold this gallium to the Americans, who used it to make chips, especially electronic components. We knew this, but we couldn't make chips ourselves, so we had to import them, buying them back at high prices from the Americans. These chips were actually the TR transmit-receive modules. This kind of story was common in the 1990s. Take steelmaking, for example. We'd take iron ore, smelt it into crude steel, and then export it to Japan. Japan would then reprocess it into special steel, which they would then sell back to us at a high price. You see, producing crude steel is polluting and energy intensive, but turning it into special steel makes the price skyrocket. This is what high-end manufacturing is all about. This is why, back in the 1990s and even into the 2000s, Americans seemed to live such easy and prosperous lives. The Japanese and Europeans also seemed to have a high quality of life, much better than ours. This was due to the different roles in global trade. China was stuck at the bottom, doing the hard work that didn't pay much, while the easy, profitable jobs were in Europe, the US, Japan, and South Korea. Some people wonder why Japan and South Korea were so lucky, always getting the best deals in global trade. It's because they were America's two dogs, so of course their master treated them well. But we weren't, so we didn't get any special treatment. Some intellectuals who lived through that era sometimes think we should have been dogs to life, might have been more comfortable, but they forget that they might be willing to be dogs, but most Chinese people aren't. That's why in China's 5,000-year history, we've only ever raised dogs, never been one ourselves. We're not cut out to be subservient. Remember the old saying, every dog has its day. Next year it might be our turn. A nation with this mindset will never settle for being second. We won't stop until we're number one. You can see why others might be afraid of us. Anyway, back to the topic. We sold this gallium byproduct from aluminum smelting to the Americans. They used it to make TR modules, and then we had to buy them back at high prices. We did this for 2 or 3 years before the Americans stopped selling to us, saying it was a military technology and they wouldn't sell it to us anymore. They tried to choke us off. So what did we do? We made our own. At the time, the chips we were buying from the Americans were made from gallium arsenide. You might know arsenic, it's basically arsenic oxide. So gallium arsenide is a compound of gallium and arsenic. This stuff is a top-notch semiconductor material, essential for making the TR modules in phased array radar. Without gallium arsenide, even with the technology, you can't make the TR modules, those little tiles in the radar. Then we started working on it. China has an organization called the Electronics Technology Group. It sounds like a private company, but it's not. It's a state-owned research unit. It's fully state-owned and produces a lot of products, all for the state. To put it simply, it's like the Ministry of Public Works in ancient times. This organization cracked the gallium arsenide technology so we could start producing our own phased array radar. But our system wouldn't stop there. In the US, when a company runs out of orders, the scientists just scatter. But in our system, people still need to get paid and show up for work. These scientists need to keep busy, right? So they keep researching according to the plan. As a result, after mastering gallium arsenide, they developed gallium nitride technology. Gallium nitride GaN is a semiconductor material that offers power density 10 times higher than that of gallium arsenide GaAs. This means that GaN components provide much higher power density compared to GaAs components, making our phased array radar much more efficient. So now, all our phased array radars use GaN technology, while the US is still largely stuck in the GaAs era. We can easily miniaturize these radars, put them on aircraft, and even install them in missile warheads. But if you look at the US, take last year's Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the USS Lucas, the only one of its kind in the world. Some bloggers hyped it up, but if you look at the Lucas, it's basically an Arleigh Burke-class ship with a giant radar sticking out of it, like a tumor. Why? Because it's the US's first ship-based phased array radar, but it's still using gallium arsenide. To match the power of our Type 05-D, they had to build a massive radar. This just goes to show how material conditions shape technological development. It's not that the US can't make GaN, but they don't have the gallium. As I mentioned earlier, gallium can only be obtained during aluminum smelting, and since the global division of labor gave the dirtiest, most labor-intensive work to us, we now have a near monopoly on gallium production. Last year, our Ministry of Commerce issued an order to control the export of gallium and germanium, citing military applications as the reason. So now the tables have turned, and we're the ones squeezing the Americans. They're stunned. Without gallium, they can't make phased array radar. As a result, in the past 6 months, one of the most profitable businesses in the US has been gallium recycling, which basically means scavenging for it. They're recycling any gallium-containing products they can find, trying to squeeze out as much as they can. This has led to a global spike in gallium prices. But the US can't solve this problem. What are they going to do? Rebuild an entire aluminum smelting industry with all its high energy consumption and pollution, just to get a few tons of gallium? That's something only China can do, and we can quickly get it up and running with our state-owned enterprises. But in a capitalist society, where businesses are profit-driven, it's not realistic to invest billions in rebuilding an aluminum industry just for gallium. This is why the US's plan to upgrade the F-45 radar fell apart. A few months ago, there was news that the US wanted to upgrade the F-35's radar to an active electronically scanned array ESA radar using the APG-85. This radar also uses GaN chips, and if the F-45 were equipped with it, its radar performance could increase threefold, potentially changing the dynamics of warfare. But because of the shortage of gallium nitride, the cost of this radar has skyrocketed. One radar now costs as much as 5 planes. Given the current state of US finances, they simply can't afford it. So far, I've heard that only 4 have been upgraded, and when the rest will be upgraded is anyone's guess. This radar's performance is roughly equivalent to the AESA radars on our J-10A and J-11B fighters. That's all for today. I've given you the basic knowledge you need. With this understanding, you'll better appreciate the next episode, where I'll explain why the US F-22 can't maintain stealth within 2,000 kilometers of China's coastline, and why South Korea's DOD, Japan's Navy, and the US Pacific Fleet have been struggling with exercises in the Yellow Sea lasting only 5 hours. You'll be able to understand the real reasons behind these issues. Thanks to all my followers for your support. Please help by sharing this.